The impossible project. The sun hung over Proxima Centauri b like a crimson coal, bleeding heat across endless dunes that stretched to every horizon. Dr. Franklin Mercer stood at the edge of the construction site, squinting through the shimmering air at what could only be described as humanity's most ridiculous engineering project yet. They were building an ocean in a desert, 300 kilometers from the nearest water. It's insane, Mercer muttered, wiping sweat from his brow despite his environment suit's climate control. Absolutely insane. Director Howard Blackton appeared beside him, a broad-shouldered man whose confident stride seemed entirely unbothered by the 120-degree heat. That's what they said about the Panama Canal, and the ISS and every other impossible thing we've built. He gestured toward the massive excavation before them. Welcome to Operation Desert Splash, Doctor. The pit was a marvel or a monstrosity depending on perspective. Automated excavators the size of apartment buildings churned through red sand and ancient stone, carving out a basin that would eventually hold 40 million cubic meters of seawater. Around the perimeter, human engineers in climate suits worked alongside construction mechs, their movements coordinated with the precision of a symphony orchestra performing in hell. Mercer had seen the schematics, studied the proposals, even voted in favor of the project during the Xenobiology Council's review. But seeing it in person, witnessing the sheer audacity of it, sent his scientific mind reeling between admiration and horror. The Varians still won't let us near the Crimson Sea, Blackton continued, his tone matter-of-fact. Their coastline is sacred, untouchable, but they never said anything about bringing the sea to us. Because no rational species would think to do that, Mercer replied. Blackton grinned. Exactly. The Varians were a proud people, tall crystalline beings who moved with liquid grace and spoke in harmonic tones that sounded like wind chimes in a storm. They'd inhabited Proxima Centauri b for millennia before humanity arrived, and they'd made their position abundantly clear. The Crimson Sea and its mysteries belonged to them. Humans could observe from orbit, could study atmospheric readings, could even establish settlements in the desert wastelands. But touch their ocean? Never. It was a reasonable restriction, Mercer supposed. Humans had a bad track record with respecting other species' sacred spaces, but it was also scientifically infuriating. The Crimson Sea harbored life forms unlike anything in Earth's databases. Bioluminescent organisms that exhibited possible collective intelligence, chemical compounds with revolutionary medical applications, and ecological patterns that defied conventional xenobiology. So humanity did what humanity always did when faced with an impossible obstacle. They found a loophole. If they couldn't go to the sea, they'd bring the sea to them. The pipeline was already half complete, a marvel of engineering that stretched across the desert like a silver serpent. 3-meter diameter conduits reinforced with titanium carbide alloys, capable of pumping 16,000 liters of seawater per second. The Varians had watched its construction with what Mercer interpreted as bewildered fascination. They'd sent delegations, asked questions, studied the human plans with their multifaceted eyes gleaming in confusion, and they'd granted permission. Perhaps they were curious. Perhaps they thought it would fail. Or perhaps, as one Varian diplomat had harmonized in their singing language, they simply couldn't comprehend why any species would expend such resources on something so impractical. The basin will be complete in 48 hours, Blackton said, pulling up a holographic display from his wristcom. Pipeline activation is scheduled for 72 hours after that. Then we start filling. He glanced at Mercer. You'll have your ocean, Doctor, and your research facility. The Proxima Deep Marine Research Facility, humanity's first landlocked sea base. Mercer watched an excavator lift a boulder the size of a house and deposit it onto a massive transport truck. The ground trembled slightly beneath his feet. And you're certain the geological surveys are accurate? This area is stable. Stable enough. The bedrock is solid. The basin is lined with polymer membranes and reinforced containment walls. We've accounted for seismic activity, thermal expansion, and evaporation rates. Blackton's confidence was absolute. This will work. It shouldn't, Mercer said quietly, but it will. Because we're human. Blackton clapped him on the shoulder. Come on, I'll show you the facility modules. They're being assembled in the staging area. They walked along the rim of the excavation, past crews installing filtration systems and circulation pumps. The facility itself would be modular, a series of pressurized habitats connected by flexible corridors, all suspended within the artificial sea. Living quarters, laboratories, observation decks, and even recreational spaces. A self-contained ecosystem where scientists could study the Crimson Sea's transplanted life forms without ever leaving the desert. It was brilliant. It was excessive. It was so perfectly, audaciously human that Mercer felt a swell of pride despite his reservations. But as they walked, something caught his attention. A crew member, a young engineer named Patel, was crouched near one of the pipeline's access ports, running a diagnostic scanner over the metal surface. Her expression was troubled. "Problem?" Mercer asked. Patel looked up, startled. "Oh, Dr. Mercer, probably nothing." She hesitated. "I'm picking up some unusual readings. Minor vibrations in the pipeline. They started about 6 hours ago." Blackton frowned. "Vibrations? Could be thermal expansion. The temperature differential between day and night here is extreme." "That's what I thought," Patel said. "But the pattern is weird. It's rhythmic. Almost like..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Never mind. I'm probably overthinking it." "Rhythmic how?" Mercer asked. His scientific curiosity piqued. Patel pulled up the data on her scanner. The waveform displayed peaks and valleys at regular intervals, a steady pulse that repeated every 11 seconds. "See? It's too consistent to be random thermal stress. But there's nothing in the pipeline yet." "It's completely empty." Mercer and Blackton exchanged glances. "Run a full diagnostic," Blackton ordered. "Check every seal, every joint, every sensor between here and the sea. If there's a structural issue, I want it identified and corrected before we start pumping." "Yes, sir." Patel nodded and returned to her work. As they continued toward the facility modules, Mercer couldn't shake the unease settling in his gut. Rhythmic vibrations in an empty pipeline. It was probably nothing. Thermal stress, residual construction harmonics, instrument error. But science had taught him never to dismiss anomalies. And on an alien world, beneath an alien sun with an alien ocean waiting to flow through human-made veins, anomalies had a way of becoming something more. The desert wind picked up, carrying red sand across the construction site. In the distance, the excavators continued their relentless work, hollowing out the earth to make room for humanity's impossible dream. Mercer looked toward the horizon, where 300 kilometers away, the Crimson Sea waited in silence, waiting to be moved, waiting to come home. The first flow, the moment the pumps activated, Franklin Mercer felt it in his bones, a deep, subsonic hum that seemed to resonate from the pipeline itself, traveling through the ground and into his chest. Around the control center, dozens of engineers monitored holographic displays showing pressure readings, flow rates, and structural integrity metrics. Every screen glowed green. "Pipeline at optimal pressure," announced Chief Engineer Torres, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were witnessing. "Flow rate at 16,000 liters per second and climbing. All seals are holding." Howard Blackton stood at the center of the command deck, arms crossed, watching the data with the satisfaction of a man who'd bet everything on an impossible hand and was watching the cards fall in his favor. "Time to first basin entry?" 47 minutes at current flow rate," Torres replied. 47 minutes until the Crimson Sea arrived in the desert. Mercer moved to the observation window overlooking the massive basin. The excavation was complete now, a crater so vast it created its own weather patterns, with cooler air sinking into its depths and creating swirling dust devils along the rim. The facility modules sat at the basin's center like metal islands waiting for their ocean, connected by a web of cables and support structures. In a few hours, water would cover them. In a few days, they'd be fully operational, if everything worked. "Dr. Mercer," a voice called from behind him. He turned to find Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the team's lead marine biologist, approaching with a tablet in hand. Her expression was troubled. "We need to talk about the water samples." Mercer's stomach tightened. "What about them?" Tanaka pulled up a series of images, microscopic views of water taken from the Crimson Sea at the pipeline's intake point. "We've been monitoring the composition every hour since activation. The chemistry is changing." "Changing how?" "The bioluminescent organisms, the microplankton we've been studying from orbit, They're becoming more active. Significantly more active. She swiped through several images showing the tiny star-like creatures. In the first image, they appeared dormant, their natural glow barely visible. In subsequent images, they blazed like miniature suns. Their luminescence has increased by 400% in the last 6 hours. Environmental stress from the pumping? Mercer suggested, though he already suspected the answer. That's what I thought initially. But the increased activity isn't random. It's coordinated. Tanaka pulled up a video showing thousands of the microscopic organisms moving in synchronized patterns, their combined light creating waves and spirals. They're communicating, or responding to something. Before Mercer could respond, alarms blared across the control center. Every head snapped toward the main display where several metrics had suddenly spiked into yellow warning zones. What the hell? Torres was already at her station, fingers flying across holographic controls. I'm reading pressure fluctuations in pipeline sectors 7 through 12. Increase of 18% above optimal. Shut down the pumps, Blackton ordered immediately. Already on it. Torres engaged the emergency shutdown sequence. The deep hum that had permeated the facility began to fade. Pumps offline. Pressure stabilizing. She paused, staring at her screen. Sir, the pressure didn't drop. What? The pumps are offline, but the flow rate hasn't decreased. The water is still moving. Torres' voice climbed with concern. It's actually accelerating, impossible. Without the pumps, gravity would cause the water to flow backward, returning to sea level. The pipeline was slightly elevated to prevent natural flow, but according to every sensor, 16,000 liters per second was now 17,000, then 18. Is it a sensor malfunction? Blackton demanded. Negative. I'm reading actual flow. The water is moving against the gradient. Torres looked up, her face pale. It's like it wants to get here. The room fell silent except for the beeping of alerts and the nervous rustle of engineers checking and rechecking their data. Mercer felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. In his years studying xenobiology, he'd learned to recognize when something fundamental about his understanding of the universe was about to shift. This was one of those moments. Restart the pumps, Mercer said quietly. Match the flow rate to the current speed. Blackton turned to him. You want to feed whatever this is? We don't have a choice. If the water's moving on its own, fighting it might rupture the pipeline. Better to control what we can and gather data. Mercer moved to Tanaka's station. Show me the live feed from the intake point. Tanaka pulled up a camera feed showing the massive intake structure at the coast where the pipeline began. The Crimson Sea churned around it, but not with the turbulence of mechanical pumping. The water moved in smooth, purposeful currents, flowing into the pipeline's mouth like a living thing entering a tunnel, like it was migrating. 30 minutes to basin entry, someone announced. Mercer watched the feed, his mind racing through possibilities. Collective intelligence, motivated organisms, unknown environmental triggers. None of it made complete sense, but xenobiology rarely did at first glance. Life found ways to surprise, especially alien life evolving in completely different chemical and environmental contexts. Torres, can you show me the vibration data from before activation? The rhythmic patterns Patel detected? Torres pulled up the historical data. The 11-second pulse pattern Patel had found was still there, but now it was much stronger. And as Mercer watched the real-time data, he realized the frequency had changed. It was now every 8 seconds. It's speeding up, he murmured, like a heartbeat. Like it's excited. That's anthropomorphizing, Tanaka said, but her tone suggested she was thinking the same thing. Maybe. Or maybe we're about to discover that the Crimson Sea is more than just a body of water filled with life. Maybe it is life. Blackton stepped closer to the window overlooking the basin. Are you suggesting the ocean itself is sentient? I'm suggesting we don't know enough to rule it out. Mercer joined him at the window. Think about it. A massive ecosystem of bioluminescent organisms that communicate through light and chemical signals. What if they're not just individuals? What if they're nodes in a larger network? A distributed intelligence spanning the entire sea? Then we've just given it a 300-kilometer extension cord, Blackton said grimly. 15 minutes to basin entry, Torres announced. The control room buzzed with nervous energy. Engineers ran final checks. Scientists prepared observation equipment. Security personnel, a precaution that had seemed unnecessary when dealing with microorganisms, stood ready at their stations. Mercer felt the weight of the moment. In 15 minutes, humanity would achieve something unprecedented, moving an ocean across a desert. But they might also be doing something far more profound and potentially dangerous. They might be helping an alien intelligence expand its reach. "Sir," Torres called out, "I'm picking up seismic activity. Minor tremors originating from the basin floor. Geological instability?" Blackton asked sharply. "Negative. The tremors are too regular, same pattern as the pipeline vibrations." Torres looked up, her eyes wide. "Whatever's causing this, it's already here. In the ground beneath the basin." Mercer's breath caught. The desert. The ancient bedrock they'd excavated. How long had Proxima Centauri b existed? How long had the Crimson Sea been here? And what if the Vorians, he said suddenly. "We need to contact the Vorians now." Blackton was already moving. "Open a channel to the diplomatic liaison." A holographic display materialized showing Ambassador Calith, a tall Vorian whose crystalline body refracted the red sunlight into rainbow patterns. Their harmonic voice filled the control room, translated by the AI into English. "Director Blackton, we have been observing your progress. Ambassador, we're experiencing unusual phenomena. The water is moving autonomously, and we're detecting seismic patterns beneath our facility. We need to know, is there something about the Crimson Sea we weren't told?" The Vorian's multifaceted eyes seemed to shimmer with what might have been sympathy or resignation. "The Crimson Sea is sacred not because of our beliefs, but because of its nature. You asked if you could take the water. We said yes because we believed you would fail." A pause. "We did not account for human persistence." "What is the sea?" Mercer demanded. "What you would call an organism. A single entity comprising trillions of parts. It has existed since before my people gained consciousness. It shaped our evolution. It is..." The transmission cut off. 5 minutes to basin entry," Torres said, her voice barely above a whisper. Through the observation window, Mercer could see the first pipelines emerging from the ground at the basin's edge. In 5 minutes, the Crimson Sea would pour forth, and they had no idea what would happen next. The facility lights flickered. The subsonic hum returned stronger than before, and from somewhere deep beneath the desert floor, something ancient began to wake. The sea remembers. The water hit the basin floor like thunder. Mercer watched from the observation deck as the Crimson Sea erupted from a dozen pipeline outlets simultaneously, cascading down in massive waterfalls that sent spray 50 feet into the air. The liquid glowed, not with reflected sunlight but with its own bioluminescent radiance, painting the basin walls in shifting patterns of red and gold and electric blue. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. "All structural integrity holding," Torres reported, though her voice wavered. "Flow rate steady at 19,000 liters per second. At this rate, the basin will reach operational depth in approximately 6 hours. 6 hours until the Proxima Deep Marine Research Facility would be properly submerged. 6 hours until humanity's impossible dream became reality, if they survived that long." The seismic activity had intensified. Nothing catastrophic yet, but the tremors came in waves matching the rhythm of the mysterious pulse that had plagued them since before the pumps even activated. Mercer had pulled up geological surveys, historical data, and every piece of information about Proxima Centauri b's substrate they could access. What he'd found changed everything. "The desert wasn't always desert," he announced, gathering Blackton, Tanaka, and the senior staff around a holographic display. 70,000 years ago, this entire region was underwater. Part of the Crimson Sea. Tanaka leaned forward, studying the ancient topographical maps. Sea level regression. Not uncommon on tectonically active worlds. Exactly. The sea receded, leaving behind sedimentary deposits and other things. Mercer pulled up chemical analysis data. "The bedrock we've been excavating contains the same bioluminescent compounds we find in the living organisms. Fossilized, dormant, but still present." "You're saying the sea used to be here?" Blackton said slowly. "And now we've brought it back." "More than that. I think the organisms, the distributed intelligence that makes up the Crimson Sea, left something behind when the waters receded. Like seeds or memories. And now that the water's returning, those dormant nodes are reactivating." As if to punctuate his words, the floor trembled. Through the observation window, they could see the basin filling rapidly, the glowing water rising to cover the lower sections of the facility modules. And beneath the surface, patterns were forming, massive spirals and geometric shapes made of millions of coordinated bioluminescent organisms. The sea was writing on the basin floor. "It's communicating," Tanaka whispered. "But what is it saying?" Before anyone could answer, the holographic communication system flickered to life. Ambassador Kalith's form materialized, but the Vorian was no longer alone. Behind them stood a council of other Vorians, their crystalline bodies resonating in harmony. "Director Blackton, Dr. Mercer, we owe you an explanation." Kalith's harmonic voice carried notes of regret. "The Crimson Sea is not merely alive. It is consciousness itself, an ancient entity that predates civilization on this world. When our people first evolved, it was the sea that guided us, that taught us, that showed us the patterns of thought and reason." "It's sapient?" Mercer asked, his voice hoarse. "More than sapient. It is the first intelligence this world knew. We Vorians are its children in a way, and when the sea receded from the desert 70 millennia ago, it was not by chance. It was choice. It deemed that land unsuitable for its needs." Blackton's jaw tightened. "And we just brought it back to a place it deliberately left." "Yes, the sea remembers its old boundaries. It remembers what lies beneath that desert, and why it chose to withdraw." The Vorian's eyes shimmered with what might have been fear. "We should have stopped you. We thought the project would fail. We underestimated human determination." "What's beneath the desert?" Mercer demanded. "What is the sea afraid of?" The transmission flickered. When Kalith's voice returned, it was barely audible through static. "Not fear, respect. The desert holds something that even the sea will not disturb. Something that sleeps. And if you continue filling that basin, if the sea reaches critical mass in that location, you may—" The transmission died completely. "Ambassador." Blackton shouted at the empty hologram. "Kalith!" No response. The communication system was completely offline. "Sir," Torres called out urgently, "the seismic activity just tripled. I'm reading tremors radiating from directly beneath the facility." Mercer ran to her station. The seismic display showed a clear epicenter, right where the facility modules sat, now half submerged in glowing water. But the tremors weren't random. They formed a pattern, a rhythm, a response. "Something down there is waking up," Mercer said. "The sea isn't invading. It's greeting something. Do we shut it down?" Blackton asked, his command voice cracking slightly. "Stop the flow, drain the basin?" "It might be too late." Tanaka was at the observation window, pointing down into the basin. "Look." The water had reached the halfway point of the facility modules, and the bioluminescent patterns had intensified to the point where the entire basin glowed like a captured sunset. But now something else was happening. The floor of the basin, the carefully prepared, reinforced, supposedly sterile substrate, was luminescent too, not glowing with reflected light from the water above, glowing on its own. Vast geometric patterns emerged from the bedrock itself, stretching across hundreds of meters, circles within circles, spirals, mathematical progressions. They pulsed in rhythm with the water above, the two light sources creating a conversation in bioluminescent code. "It's not just the sea," Mercer breathed. "The desert, the bedrock, it's alive too. Or it was, and now it's being reactivated." "Then what the hell are we sitting on top of?" Blackton demanded, as if in answer the ground gave a massive heave. Not a tremor, a deliberate motion like something immense shifting beneath them. Alarms blared. Engineers grabbed onto consoles. Coffee cups crashed to the floor, and then through the observation window they saw it. One of the facility modules, a 3-story structure of reinforced titanium and polymer composites, was rising. Not floating on the water, rising from beneath, pushed upward by something under the basin floor. The metal groaned and buckled. Support cables snapped like guitar strings. "Evacuate the facility," Blackton roared. "All personnel to the surface transports now!" Personnel streamed toward the exits, but Mercer couldn't move. He was transfixed by what he was seeing. The basin floor was breaking apart, massive stone slabs lifting and separating like puzzle pieces, and beneath them, in the growing gaps, he saw structures, not natural geology, architecture, ancient, geometric, carved from stone that glowed, with the same bioluminescent compounds as the Seitu columns, arches, walls. covered in patterns that matched the light language, being written by the organisms in the water. "It's a city," he whispered, "buried under 70,000 years of desert. We built our facility right on top of a city." Tanaka stood beside him, equally stunned. The sea didn't abandon this place because it was unsuitable. It abandoned it because something else was already here, Mercer finished. Something that predated even the sea. The water swirled and churned as more structures emerged from the basin floor. A tower, a dome, platforms and bridges connecting impossible geometries. The facility modules were being pushed aside, reduced to insignificant debris by the awakening of something immeasurably ancient. And through it all, the bioluminescent organisms in the water danced and pulsed, not in alarm or aggression, but in what looked like greeting, celebration. The sea had come home, not to reclaim its old territory, but to reunite with something it had left behind. "Sir, we need to go." Torres grabbed Blackton's arm. "The upper structures are destabilizing." But Blackton was watching the same thing Mercer was. The ancient city, if that's what it was, had fully emerged now, its highest towers reaching halfway up the basin walls. Water cascaded down its stone faces, and the bioluminescent organisms settled into carved channels and pools, filling them with living light. It was functioning. After 70 millennia, the city was functioning again. "We didn't bring the sea to the desert," Blackton said quietly. "We brought it back to where it was always meant to be. Back to its partner? Its counterpart?" "The Vorians said the sea was their teacher," Mercer replied. "But what if the sea had a teacher too? What if the city, the civilization, came first?" A deep vibration ran through the facility, not destructive but resonant like a bell being struck. And then, from the speakers of the now functioning communication system, a sound emerged. Not static, not interference. Music, harmonic tones that rose and fell in complex patterns, carrying meanings that bypassed language and spoke directly to something deeper. The Vorian's harmonic speech was beautiful, but this was transcendent. It was mathematics made audible. It was the sound of deep time and deeper thought. Are they communicating?" Tanaka asked. "The sea and the city," Mercer confirmed. "They're talking to each other. And I think—" He pulled out his tablet, running the audio through analysis software. The pattern matches Vorian speech structures, but it's exponentially more complex. This might be the root language, the source code for consciousness on this world. Another massive tremor shook the facility. This time, a crack appeared in the observation window. "We really need to leave now," Torres said firmly. "Surface transports are loaded. We're the last ones." Reluctantly, Mercer tore his gaze from the impossible sight and followed his colleagues toward the exit. Behind them, the Proxima Deep Marine Research Facility, humanity's impossible dream, was being consumed by something far more impossible. The facility modules collapsed into the water, sinking toward the ancient city below, where they would probably lie as curious artifacts for whatever came next. As the team reached the surface transports and climbed inside, Mercer took one last look at the basin. The water level was still rising, fed by the relentless pipeline. Soon it would overflow, spreading across the desert, returning to its ancient boundaries. The Crimson Sea was going home, and humanity had been the one to make it possible, not through conquest or extraction, but through sheer stubborn refusal to accept the word impossible. The transport lifted off, carrying them away from the site. Below, the basin glowed like a star had fallen to Earth. "What do we tell Earth?" Torres asked. "What do we put in the report?" Blackton was quiet for a long moment, watching the retreating glow. Finally he smiled, a tired, amazed, slightly traumatized smile. "We tell them the truth. We built a sea base in a desert. And it worked." "Did it?" Tanaka asked. "We lost the facility. The project failed." "No," Mercer said, understanding what Blackton meant. "We set out to bring the ocean to the desert so we could study alien life. We succeeded. We just didn't realize the alien life we'd encounter would be an ancient civilization we literally unearthed. The sea base worked exactly as intended. We just got more than we bargained for. Only humans," Torres said, shaking her head in disbelief, "would accidentally resurrect a 70,000-year-old city while trying to build a research station." "Only humans would try in the first place," Blackton countered. "Every other species looked at that desert and saw limitations. We saw possibilities." The transport carried them toward the human settlement on the horizon, where no doubt 1,000 questions awaited. But Mercer wasn't thinking about debriefings or reports. He was thinking about the conversation happening in that basin, between sea and city, between ancient consciousnesses that had waited eons to reconnect. Humanity hadn't conquered anything today. They'd been intermediaries, cosmic plumbers who'd laid the pipe that allowed something beautiful and strange to return home. And somehow, that felt better than any triumph of pure engineering could have. As Proxima Centauri B's red sun began its descent toward the horizon, the newly restored sea gleamed in its light. Soon the Vaurians would come to investigate. Diplomats would arrive. Scientists would study the ancient city and try to understand its purpose. But for now, in this moment, Franklin Mercer allowed himself to feel something he rarely experienced: awe at humanity's place in the cosmos, not as conquerors, not as masters, but as the stubborn, impossible species that could look at a waterless desert and say, "Let's put an ocean there," and somehow make it work.